Today, I'm at the Miners Museum here in Inverness, Nova Scotia, and I'm speaking to Terry MacDonald, a curator here. Now, perhaps you can tell me a little bit about the genesis or the beginning of the museum, when it was founded, and, exactly what can visitors expect to find here when they come.
The museum came about as a result of a group of us. We were writing local history articles for the local newspaper, the Oran. And after about 2 years of writing, people kept on saying, why don't you preserve what you're researching? And we started collecting in the basement of the old credit union. And we found out there's loads of stuff people were willing to donate, but we didn't have a home for it. So this building was empty. It was slated for demolition. Alan Jay was our Member of Parliament. It was owned by CN. Federal Cooperative Agency. So we went to Alan Jay and he got us the building, and then we got winter grants to fix it over a number of years. And we started collecting. And we find that the museum becomes more and more important as the community evolves. Inverness is now known as the homes of Cabot, which is one of the top 10 rated golf course in the world today. So the museum, the way Inverness was, becomes more and more important because what we are doing is cataloging and putting on different events in the area. But the museum is not just a thing that's here. It's the community. It's the lifeblood of the community, and it reflects the community, the history, the ups, the downs. When the Hussies sold their interest in the Inverness coal mines, it was bought up by a pair called Mackenzie and Mann. They built the company houses and they developed the mines. And that's when Inverness really became a threshold of workers from Europe. You had mostly people working in the mines that were Scots, but the Scots weren't miners. They were agrarian, they were farmers. So they start bringing in the Belgians. The Belgians were miners, and they had been brought in by the old Dominion Coal Company in Glace Bay in the Waterford. And the Inverness mines, Mackenzie and Mann, start stealing them and taking them to Inverness, to the point that we have what we call the Belgium town around where the arena is today. And they stayed in their own cluster because they wanted to protect their culture and their language. They got along fine with the Scots until Friday night when they had the 10-cent dances at the hall. And of course, when the liquor started flowing, the fists started flowing too. And on Friday night, if you wanted to be guaranteed a good fight, you went up to Belgium town. And this used to go on for months and months. And you still have Belgian families in Inverness that have intermarried. But that's why the museum becomes important. It is a reflection of the community, where the community was and where the community is going today.
I was just, looking around, and what strikes me is how difficult a life these miners must have had. So we're talking, when was the mines first opened in Inverness? Sometime in the 19th century, right?
The mines first started on a trickle in the late 1800s. And the first seam was the big river down on the other end of town. And it's a fellow by the big red beacon started. And then when Hussey came from Denver, Massachusetts, he started looking at the coal seams. And an interesting story, he was looking for investment money. He didn't want to spend his own money. So he took a bunch of investors from Switzerland, and he took them on a scow. And if you look at Cabot Cliffs, the signature hole has gypsum sticking out, which is white rock. So he hired a bunch of people from town and gave them buckets of black paint, and he painted the gypsum. And of course, then he went with the investors and was pointing out that the coal is sitting right there, it's easy to get, and on the spot he had $1 million worth of investment. Of course, they didn't get off the scow because it was too rough for them to arrive. So anyway, that's the money that he played with. So there's a lot of stories. The miners worked in to be plight, abject poverty. They were renting the company houses from the company, so therefore you towed the line off the company.
So we're looking at this time frame, this would have been the 20s, right? So
20s, early 30s.
Now, when this Hussey fellow, this would have been in the later part of the 19th century. Sounds like a real bit of a grifter.
Yeah.
Right? Painting rocks and...
When Hussey came, he had free reign. Because the area was agricultural, it was lumbering, it was fishing. The Scots had never seen lobsters before because they were used to lox and salmon and trout. When they were catching these lobsters, they didn't know what to do with them. So they ground them up and used them for fertilizer in their fields. And as a result, lobsters was a poor man's feed at one time. Things have changed.
Now, if you buy one, it makes you poor.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Now, this is a time period, what, about 1880 to...
1880 to about 1912, 1910.
And then you had the unions come in, but for the most part, the unions would have been a tool of management. They really weren't representing the workers.
No, they were representing management. And of course, they paid very poorly.
Now, I'm looking around and I'm seeing some of the exhibits that you have. Some of these people who went in the mine were actually children.
Yes. There's some of the pictures here. You have a group photo of them, and there's several that are 10 and under working in the mines. This is the precursor of social assistance. If the man was killed in the mines, the miners would make a collection, give it to the widow, and that was it. So you had to have income going into the house.
Well, I want to thank you, Terry. It's been very informative and very interesting. Now, I understand I'm going to speak to Mary Chisholm, and she, I understand, is from a coal mining family.
She is, and she could give you some insights in what it's like to live in a company, a house, and bring up a large family. And welcome to Inverness, and welcome to the museum.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome.
I'm speaking with Mary Chisholm, who's a guide here at the Miners Museum in Inverness, Nova Scotia. Now, I understand that you come from a mining family, and maybe you can tell me how that affects when you take visitors throughout the museum itself.
Oh, that's a wonderful question to ask, because I come from a big family. I'm the third oldest of 10. I was brought up in a place called the Red Roads. It was like a community unto itself, where your mother was my mother, your father was my father, and believe me, we learned sharing and caring at a young age, because when you live in a company house, you have one family on this side and a family on the other side, and there's a piece of gyprock separating the two families. So I always tell people, you certainly knew what was going on in the other one's home. When a new family moved in, our first question was always, how many kids they got? And someone would say 4, what's wrong with them? Because a small family was 8, okay? Because we're always looking for little friends to have baseball, play marbles, play hide and go seek. And it was a way of life to care and share here. And that's what I love most. When people come, our visitors come from all over the world here, okay? And I love sharing our stories about what it was like in the 50s to grow up here. And it was that, we never, people say, oh, it's poverty. Yes, but we never realized that because we're all in it together.
So you had a community.
Yes, that kept us going. Yes, there was hard days. Yes, there was days of crying and talk about cold. I can remember waking up. You wouldn't have to know what the weather was like because you'd see your breath in the bedroom. I can remember as a little girl taking in the clothes, frozen stiff, and hang them with the tin in the back of the stove. We all had our own jobs to do. You come home after school, take in the coal, take in the wood, do the dishes, look after the younger children, you know. There was none of this Why should I do it, Ma? You know?
I've had that experience with
They had
my
that
own family.
strong, feeling. And I always tell people, and in the nighttime, you had to bank the fire. That means getting the fire ready for the morning. And, I tell people, your greatest fear when you're slept in the company house is called a big room, because usually there'll be a big iron bed with 3 children in it, and then a crib for the baby, and then another iron bed with 3 more children. You had 7 children. It's called the big room. That was the main, where most of the heat was. And your greatest fear was you're going to get peed on, because you'd either get peed on or you're going to have a toe up your nose, okay, or an elbow on your side. So you get up in the morning, you were like at an angle, okay? And I used to have 2 of my sisters. Like I said, there's 10 in our family, 5 boys and 5 girls. So it was like this. And you get up and you go to the window. If you saw, you put your hand, ooh, and the first question was, who's going to go down to light the fire? And if you were fortunate to have an indoor plumbing, great. But if you didn't, it was either the chamber pots under the bed or the outhouse. And you didn't want to go to the snow up to your knees and to go to the outhouse. And the tea was constantly flowing, and always storytelling. We used to love to sit around the warm morning and tell ghost stories and scare each other and play cards, and we used our imagination.
I had not the experience you had, but something similar to that. You would come in and, it would be 12 o'clock, and of course, there were 6 of us, and my mom would feed us, and then out.
That's it.
And come back for supper, and then you ate supper, and then it would be come back again when the street lights come on.
Yes. Okay,
And so we would go on our bikes, we would go everywhere.
We were adventurous. We'd go picking blueberries and go roaming in the woods, go on picnics. We used to love to go on picnics just around here down by the pond. And this field this was my playground growing up here.
So even though times were difficult, the people would band together in community.
Yes, that is the main lesson that we've learned. And even today, people say, oh, so kind. That's just the way it is.
It struck me that, the companies and nobody gave these people any support. If you didn't pay the rent, you were tossed out of the company house.
Out you go. If you complained, if you made any kind of a stink, and I commented and said, oh my God, it's awful hard in the mine today, and well, there's somebody else can take your place. You're not happy with the conditions. Well, that's just too bad. And I can remember going up to the company store and saying to the manager, Mommy wants a food on tick. What did I know about tick at 7 years old? But it meant you had no money until the paycheck came in, right? And so, Mommy wants half a roll of bologna and 5 pounds of potatoes and 2 pounds of flour to eat.
But it says something about the human spirit and condition that despite all the hardships and the difficulties and the death that was taking place, they still found ways to come together and celebrate life.
Exactly. And Terry told beautiful stories right there. And no matter, it just shows you the strength in the spirit of human beings, that you continue to go on no matter what the situation is.
We were talking about the generations, where you're of a generation, I'm of a generation, and I understand Ben is much younger and he's going to have a different perspective on it.
Yes, Ben is wonderful.
And I want to thank you, Mary. You're quite a good storyteller. I can see why visitors would come here and they would be fascinated with these stories, because some of the older ones, it would reflect their own childhood.
But it was a joy to speak here. I really, really enjoyed it. And thank you for listening to me, okay? Because again, I think it's so important to never, ever, ever forget the past. And I'd like to say a poem here. I learned this in grade 2. Black is for the wealth of our coal mines. Gray is for our Cape Breton steel. Green is for our lofty mountains, our valleys and our fields. Gold's for the golden sunset that shines on the lakes of Bador, and to show God's hand does linger, and to bless our Cape Breton shore.
Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
I'm speaking to Ben McKay, a student here at the Miners Museum in Inverness. Perhaps you can tell me about how you came about to this position and what do you do here?
So my job is a tour director, and I kind of manage day-to-day operations here at the museum and with the Historical Society at large. My family connections in regards to mining are my great-grandfather was a miner, my grandfather was a miner. It's obviously extremely prevalent for many in the community, and my story is not unique, but I obviously have direct personal connection to it.
It's wonderful to have all these artifacts here, but it's the connection to the people that's what's really important.
Yeah, so one thing that is kind of lost a lot of the time, I find, with especially bigger museums, is that history is a living thing. It's not something that, you can have your figures and your numbers and all of that and your dates and all of that's important. But ultimately what you're doing is you're telling a story of people who lived, who loved, who died, and worked, and they worked very hard. And so that's what our museum is here to do, to preserve their legacy, to preserve the things that they did and things that they cared about. And so that's what we're here to do as a museum and as a community at large. Even as we advance as a society and as a community, Inverness has come a long way since our incorporation and before that. But it's important to remember the contributions that miners made, working people in these communities made, because without those contributions, we wouldn't be where we are today. We'd be far, far away from the modern advancements that we've made and the positive steps that we've made in recent years. So
now, when you're doing this job and you say your father and your grandfather were coal miners, do you ever think what they would think if they saw you now?
Yeah, I oftentimes do think about it. My grandfather was born into a very different world than I was born into. He was born to a mother and father in 1921, and shortly after he was born, his mother died. That story is not something that's extremely unique, especially for that time, but it's important because it kind of puts into frame the struggles that he would have experienced throughout his life. His mother's name was Elizabeth. She went by Libby, and for the first few weeks they weren't sure what to call him because he had no name, and so eventually they just started calling him Libby's son, Libby's son. Eventually that morphed into Libson, which was the tag that he carried around for the next 90 years of his life. But he was raised in a rural community where there wasn't a lot of opportunities, and he made the best of a situation that many today would look at and think was pretty dire. He went to war as a young man to Europe, and he came back and he went into the mines. So he went from one extremely difficult situation, dangerous situation, right into another. And he worked until he was 65, and he was a mine manager towards the end of his career. And, one of the things that I try and do when I'm doing my tours is answer the main question of why did they do it? And the three main answers that I come to are community, because it's the sense that you're doing something bigger than yourself when you're doing this job. Obviously, they didn't have much of another choice, and especially in one industry community such as this, but also that need to provide for your family. So my grandfather had 8 children. He sent them all to school, and that was something that he and my grandmother were extremely proud to do. And so I think about those kinds of things a lot when I'm doing my tours here.
And it's odd in my mind how this would have continued on into Canada. For example, you would have had miners in Northern Ontario and out west. But, and you say community, for us, for example, we love hockey.
Yeah.
But if you get a player, they never say, I scored, I did this, it's we did this, we did this.
Yeah.
It's sort of a basis that's become a very Canadian thing. We tend to think of us as we, a community. Right. So with the miners, and it's sort of transitioned into the rest of the country almost.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that there's something uniquely Canadian about that kind of there's no I in team attitude, and I think that was definitely prevalent with a lot of workers who were, doing their thing in the early 20th century. This kind of, pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Nobody's going to do it for you, so you better get out there and work together with the people who are also struggling to make ends meet, because that's the only way you're going to be able to do things.
And, you know, and speaking with Mary, she's a wonderful storyteller. I suspect that when you're giving the tours in the museum, I mean, the artifacts are wonderful. It's absolutely great that local people donate all these artifacts. But in my experience, what really connects with people are the human stories. Now, as for me, it's sort of a personal and emotional, because my grandfather was here in the 30s, and he was a coal miner here. So there is a sort of a personal connection here, and I imagine you feel it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's something that I get the most enjoyment from, when we have people who have that personal connection that come here. And don't get me wrong, it's great. We love having people who just want to come here and learn. But for me as a tour guide, when we have people coming in who, say, my uncle or my father or whoever was a miner, and I don't know much about them, could you tell me more about what they did? Or can you tell me more about them, or where they might have lived? And you get to kind of turn back those tea leaves of, you know, well, who are they? Where were they? You know, where did they live? Do we know anything about them? Can we help them find out some things? That's certainly one of the most rewarding things about this job and about what we do here at the museum. And so it's important that those things are remembered as well, that there is a human element behind every swing of the pickaxe, that there was a living, breathing soul behind it who had dreams, like I said, who loved and lived and died, and we're here to kind of preserve that.
Now, are there anything on the slate for plans for the summer, any events or anything like that?
Not in particular, but we're looking forward to the Inverness Gathering, which is upcoming in July, and we're looking forward to getting more things off the ground in the future. So we'll see what comes, but we're very much eagerly anticipating getting some more things involved in the community.
Well, I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and I hope your visitation goes through the roof this summer.
The pleasure's been all mine.
Right.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome.